Well, as you can see, it is a rather unpleasant day here in northern Indiana. I had hoped to get out and get some splitting done on the wood that we bucked up in the last video, but we have had some snow flurries, some rain, some freezing rain. Currently we're back to rain, and it is just slick and miserable outside. So I think what I'm going to do is a video that I've been wanting to make for some time. Those of you that have followed along will remember me talking about this. I'll take you in and I'm going to show you my old Woodland wood stove. And I'll take you up and talk to you a little bit about my Vermont Castings Aspen C3. So let me get some stuff finished up here at the barn, and then we will head inside where it is warm and dry, and we'll look at some wood stoves. Stick with me. Okay folks, so this is the stove that I heat my outbuilding. If you ever hear me talk about the annex, that's where we're at right now, is the annex. This is the very first wood stove I ever had. This was in my previous house. When I first moved to northern Indiana, we were living in a rental house that belonged to my mother-in-law, and it had a very inefficient gas furnace in it that was pretty old. The house was actually an old corn crib that had been converted into a house. Technically, it had been converted into a pottery shop, and then we turned it into a house. And figured out that the gas bill was really expensive to run that old antique natural gas furnace that was in it. So my mother-in-law's boyfriend back then says, "Hey, I've got this old wood stove in the barn. If you want to redo it, you can have it." And I was like, of course, I immediately said yes before I ever even seen the wood stove. And we went and drug it out of the barn, and it was basically a giant ball of rust. All the fire brick inside of it was busted up. It probably hadn't been used in 20 plus years, and it was, needless to say, it was in rough shape. So I got that wood stove in the summertime is when he gave it to me. So during the summer when I got it, I went through and I cleaned it all up, cleaned all the rust and stuff off of it, bought new fire brick, put new fire brick in it, put a new seal on the door, and then we installed it in that house. And that was our we still had the natural gas furnace, don't get me wrong, that we would use, or it was available for use, I should say, but we never used that furnace after we installed the wood stove. We heated that old house solely with this wood stove here. And it is a good stove. It is a north-south stove, as you could kind of tell from me loading it. It'll take about a 22-inch piece of firewood. So anytime I have some longer cuts where I may not have been paying attention or was just being lazy and not using my marking stick, and I get some that are a little long, that wood comes to this, the wood racks for down here, and I burn that stuff down here. I try to primarily burn oak in this stove, primarily for the simple reason is this thing is the hungriest wood stove I've ever operated. Granted, I've only ever operated two for my own heat source. I mean, I've used wood stoves at rented cabins and stuff like that, but as far as heating my house for the winter, this is what I've had. This and my one that's up at the other house. But anyways, this thing is very hungry, so I've always tried to burn as much oak in it as possible. I can tell you the last 2 years, the only thing we've burnt in this stove has been hard maple that I don't get a lot of, but I had some hard maple, red and white oak, and a little bit of cherry. And of course we burn cherry because, well, if you've been watching, I have a ton of it. So, and I get more and more of it all the time. So, but it works great in this stove, and it holds the fire good in this stove, and it kind of helps with consumption down here. So, and we don't burn this stove anymore full time. My daughter lives down here in the annex, and she uses it basically as some supplemental heat. So she builds a fire in the evenings and burns it at night. And then it has a very efficient furnace in this building. So during the day when she's at work or at school, we just let the furnace run. That way she doesn't have to worry about getting up in the morning and trying to get this, making sure the fire's going and all that sort of stuff. But since Dad pays the propane bill for this house, she does what she can to save me a little bit of money. So basically this stove gets burnt evenings and weekends at this point. And as you can see in the beginning, I was just starting a fire in it. I come down and did a good clean out on it, made sure I got all the ash and stuff out. It hadn't been cleaned out, I don't think, since last weekend. But great stove. I want to say, if I had to guess, this old Woodland's probably from the 70s or 80s maybe. I know Alan had it originally. It was a stove he used in his house until he got a bigger wood stove. And the squirrel on the front of it and the draft door, those are like nickeled or bronzed, plated. And when we had a leak around the flue a couple years ago, and had some water get on it, and when I cleaned it up, I never went back and brushed the stove black off of the nickel. If you get a piece of steel wool on that squirrel and on the draft door, it'll clean off pretty easy, and it looks nice. Nobody's ever up here to see it, so to be honest, I just never took the time to do it. But I'll tell you a funny story real quick about this wood stove. So, like I said, this was what I was heating my first house that I lived in up here in northern Indiana with. And where the area I live in is the area that my wife grew up in. And oddly enough, when we started dating and I found out that she was from this area, I kind of laughed because when I was a kid, we vacationed up here. My mom's whole side of her family, we come up to one of the lakes and would spend our summers up here. And I was familiar with the area. And of course my parents were familiar with the area because my mom had been coming up here since she was a little girl. And that was the time that my grandpa would take off of work and fish, was when they come up here. So and he loved to fly fish. But anyways, so Mom and Dad come up here, and it was winter time. It was the first time my parents had been up and stayed the night with my wife and I after we had moved up here. They'd been up and visited, but they'd never stayed overnight. And so Mom knew that we were heating solely with this wood stove. And my mom grew up in a house that had a coal furnace in it. And so my mom come up here, and my mom was expecting in the middle of the night to be cold. And Dad, of course, he doesn't think anything about it. He just comes up and he knows he's going to roll up in a blanket and he'll be fine. But Mom didn't really pay close attention to what was going on when she got here. It was like, I don't know, I'll say the weekend that they were here, it was a cold weekend, like highs in the 20s. And when they got to the house, our front door was open, and the storm door, we had the window cracked. And if she'd have paid close attention, she'd have noticed that there was a long hallway that went through that house back to the kitchen, and it made a straight shot from the front door to the kitchen. And we had one of the kitchen windows cracked as well, because in that little 800 square foot house with this stove going, the way you regulated the heat was by the cross draft of cold air from the front door or from the kitchen window blowing through. And this stove happened to be in that hall between the front door and the kitchen. So that's how we regulated the heat, because if you didn't crack a window and it was only 20 degrees outside, this thing going, that house would be 85. And so my mom shows up thinking she's going to freeze to death in the middle of the night, and she's got like wool pajamas. And my mom goes to bed that night, and we had a hide bed in our living room, and that's what my parents were sleeping on. And I remember waking up because I heard my dad say, "What the hell are you doing, woman?" And my mom got up in the middle of the night and was digging through my dad's suitcase or duffel bag, whatever he had with him, looking for one of his t-shirts, because Mom was like cooking in them wool pajamas because she didn't think the house would stay that warm. Me and Carmen were laying in bed kind of snickering to one another, listening to them two go at it because how hot the house was. But anyways, but that's my old Woodland stove. Like I said, it's been a trooper. There's been many stories told around it, and I'm glad that I've moved it around and kept it through these years. So like I said, it is a hungry stove. At the old house, heating with it, primary heat source, we would burn roughly a cord of wood a month. Now, take into consideration, it's a not very efficient wood stove, for one, and my 800 square foot house that we were heating with it was a corn crib that had been converted into a house. So it wasn't exactly the most airtight building on the face of the planet. And I will also say, back then, our winters were a lot more severe than we've had in the recent past. I would say realistically we would burn 2 to 3 face cords per month though at the old house. So over a heating season, it was not uncommon for me to burn 5 or 6 cords of firewood. And thankfully, with that new Vermont casting stove in the house, it's a lot more efficient, and we'll talk about that when we get up to the house. So hope y'all like seeing my old girl. She's trusty, but yep, let's head up to the house. Well, here we are up at the house. This is my Vermont Castings Aspen C3. This is not a catalyst stove, so this does not have a catalyst in it. They use what's called continuous combustion control. That's what the C3 stands for. It is rated to have up to a 10-hour burn time on it. And I would say if you've got the right mix of wood, you can get pretty dad burn close to 10-hour burn time on it. I generally load the stove when I get up at around 4 in the morning. I'll throw a couple pieces in just to make sure it's hot in the house warm in the house when my wife gets up. And she'll throw a couple more pieces in when she leaves for work. And so from the time she leaves till the time she gets back home, it's about 9 hours. And generally, if I've got a good mix of wood up here, something like, if it's full of like elm and maple, there's not much left in it. But if you've got some oak or some hickory and some cherry, and you've got a good coal bed in it, when you get home, it's not uncommon for the stove to still be at 200 degrees, and you can generally get in there, rake the coals around, throw a couple pieces in, and it takes right back off. So I have been impressed with that. If it's really cold, don't get me wrong, that the house will, and the stove's down to 200 degrees, the house will cool down a little bit. But I think the coldest we've come home to has been like about 66 degrees. So, and that was the week that we had sub-zero temperatures. So I'm not going to complain about that. Overall, the stove has been really good. It's simple to operate because there is no draft on it. It has its own air intake system, so you can actually get an auxiliary kit for it. So like if you don't get enough fresh air into it, there's a port on the back and you can plumb in an outside fresh air intake for it. We didn't have any issues with it drafting, so we didn't have to do that. So basically, when it's got like a thermal coil in the back of it, so as the stove heats up, it reduces intake air, and as the stove cools off, it increases intake air. And so you yourself, you don't have to mess with it, which is one of the reasons. Another reason I picked this stove was with our old Woodland. That is the one thing my wife was never super comfortable with. She has used that stove for many years, but she always wanted me to go and double check how she had the draft set and on, of course, the damper on that stove. This stove has been pretty easy. To be honest, my wife deals with this stove probably more than I do because she beats me home from work. As long as I keep the wood rack on the porch full, she'll take care of the inside of it. And it's nice because, especially when I'm working overtime, coming home and it's already, the fire's built back up and the house is back up to, mid 70s. So it's pretty nice. But the only issue we've had with this stove was when we first got it. For the baffle and the firebox, there is a vermiculite plate. And then on top of that piece of vermiculite, there is a piece of kale wool or something similar to kale wool on top of it. It's an insulation blanket to help hold heat in the stove. And we had done our burn-in or our break-in cycles on it and done all that. And the first night that we built a regular heating fire in it, everything worked great. Well, the next morning when I got up and I went to put some wood in it, I couldn't hardly keep it going. It was like, it would try to, like, it just almost smoldered. And it made me and the wife both were a little nervous about it. So I just knocked the fire apart. And the house was warm enough. We figured we'd be fine till evening anyways. And if it gets down to 60, the forced air furnace will kick on. So we just didn't worry about it. And when I got home, I messed with it. And same deal. The only way I could keep a fire going in it was if the door was open. And if you closed and latched the door, the smoke would literally, or the fire would go out, and then it would, all the smoke would roll out the fresh air intake out the back of the stove. So I put a call into the people that we bought it from. It was a little time consuming to get anywhere with them, and I'm not saying they were slow at getting to it. The people we bought it from is a Amish family. They have a business up in Shipshewana that we bought it from, and when you call them, you have to leave a voicemail, and then they check the voicemails throughout the day, and then they call you back. So that's what I did. I called and left them a voicemail. Well, in the process, I started doing a little digging, and I could see something hanging out of the flue. And I'll put some pictures in the video so you can kind of see what was going on with it. I'll put them in here. But anyways, so you kind of see when I wound up taking the flue pipe off eventually, and I found that KO wool blanket or whatever it is on top of that vermiculite, the draft on this thing was so good that it actually sucked that off the vermiculite plate. And you know, I called the guys back and let them know that, hey, I figured out what was going on with it. And they made arrangements to come down. They were going to take care of it and fix everything up. So I waited for them. They come down. It took them a few days to get here because it is what it is. But they got here and they had it fixed fast. I don't think it's for the Vermont Castings, but one of the other companies that they sell wood stoves for, they have some weights that you can put on those KO wool blankets to keep them in place. And they're like, all they are just little thin pieces of, well, I say thin. They're probably like 1/4 inch or 3/16 thick stainless steel. And he had a handful of them when he come in, and he got the blanket pushed out, and then he stuck one of those in all 4 corners of the blanket to just help it keep in place. And so he told me that they'd ran into that with a different brand of stove. That's why they had those weights. But since they've done that, the stove has worked great. It does a really good job of heating. The main floor of my house is right about 900 square foot. And like it stays plenty warm in here. The basement has some supplemental heat in it, besides what, you know, from the upstairs staying warm, but it's also like pretty much totally underground. So the basement holds its temperature pretty well to begin with. And like I said, if it gets really, really cold, there's we have heat, a separate heat source for the basement, and it kind of keeps it tuned up anyways. So but the rest of the house, I mean, it does a great job of keeping the house warm. So other than that, I'm not sure what else to tell you about it. It was interesting getting ready for the stove. I had never done ceramic tile work before, so the hearth and the surround was new to me. There's some things I would definitely do different on that the next time. The lip of the hearth here being one of them. I had an idea how I thought that was going to turn out, and it didn't. So, but anyways, I've eaten up enough of your time blabbering on about my wood stoves. I hope you found the information helpful and handy. Oh, and while I'm thinking about it, Kenny at Open Air Adventures, one of his videos, he showed how he cleans the glass in his wood stove. And I'll be honest, this is the first wood stove I've ever had with glass in it. So, of course, when we bought the wood stove, I got the bottle of the spray stuff. And it works really nice, but it stinks. And it makes a heck of a mess. And I really didn't like using it. And when I seen Kenny show how he uses the white ash out of the stove on a damp cloth, and it breaks down the film on the door, which, as you can tell, I didn't get cleaned off before we did the video. I got other stuff to do. What can I say? But he showed doing that, and that, if you folks haven't used that trick, it works great. And I was just, it's easy. And actually, when we come home from work in the evenings now, when the stove is cooler, if it has a film on it, generally we'll just go ahead and clean the glass off. And it's fantastic because then you can sit in here in the evenings after supper and watch the fire, and it just is absolutely just beautiful to sit here and watch. So anyways, with that being said, I ain't got anything else, so I will let you all go. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you again soon.